Welcome. My name is Frank Congilose. I'm a managing partner here at C&A Financial Group. I'm happy to be with one of our top advisors and strategists, Brian Cunniff.
Thank you, Frank.
So it's always a pleasure to do this program together.
Absolutely.
So you've got this, what I'll call the seasoned end of the business, which is and the middle end of the business. With Brian here, who's been with us for many years, and a great cash flow strategist, and he'll be sharing some thoughts with you. So we're going to get started. Our focus for this evening is really to show people how to really become a master saver. And so the goal behind that is how do you become a master saver without having to give up any lifestyle today? I always say is if we were in the ideal world with ideal planning, the result of what we're going to talk about today would mean that when all is said and done, is if you were to follow the strategies that we talk about, you're going to increase your opportunities and your future, where the end result is you'd end up with more wealth in terms of cash flow and quality of life. You don't have to take more risk in anything that you're doing, although your risk tolerance is your call. Your assets should be better protected, and you should be able to accomplish that without changing your lifestyle today. So this conversation today is not about, hey, you need to go on a budget or any of that. It's really about how do you create opportunities and strategies to give yourself a much better future going forward, and how do you really have more wealth, and you don't have to give up any lifestyle. So for those of you who are online today, and those of you who listen to this in the future, that's the goal of this conversation, and we know that it can be done, and we're going to show you how that happens. So this is our legal disclaimer, saying that we're not attorneys, we're not practicing law, we're not giving legal advice, anything like that. You can check with the appropriate person. So it's been a few years now, but the last book that I came out with was called Last Check. And so the advice that we're providing today is really designed to get you to the point of, one too many, of the fact that at some point, every single one of us is going to stop. Go ahead, Brian, you can go back one. Every single one of us, at some point in time, we're going to stop working. And when we stop working, what's going to happen then is all of the financial decisions that we made up till that point in time is going to determine what does our quality of life look like going forward. So if you think of it this way, someone who retires, on the day that they retire, they've effectively have gotten to the point where accumulation phase of life may have stopped. And so now what's happening is whatever they've accumulated up till that point has to carry them for the rest of their ride. So the whole point of planning for the last check is critical so that you can have a great quality of life when you stop working. And so that's what this is really all about, which is what happens when that last check comes. And you can't wait until you're 60 years old and start planning for it then. You've got to start early on. As a matter of fact, here's why you've got to start early. So we take an example and we say that, hey, if I had the ability today to start putting away $10,000 a year, and if I did it for 10 years, and then at the end of 10 years I stopped and I allowed the money to grow, if the money was accumulated at 5%, I'd have $350,000, say at retirement age or 30 years. And if it was at 7%, I'd have $572. Now, this is what I call the hard easy versus the easy hard. So this is someone who does the hard parts first, Brian, if you think about it. They meet us and they go, hey, I'm going to save for the next 10 years. And then they never saved again for the next 20. That's their totals. And then we're going to look and we're going to say, what happens if somebody said, hey, you know what, I really goofed off for the first 10, but I'm going to be really good for the next 20, which means they're effectively going to put away double. They're going to pay $10,000 or put away $10,000 for 20 years. Assuming the same 5% and 7%, when you look at the numbers on that 30-year study, they still never catch up. And for a lot of people, when you think about it, Brian, that's a hard concept for them to figure out. And I know that when you talk to clients and so forth, and you show them the significance of it, I mean, I'm sure you get feedback.
I think, one, people are surprised that, holy cow, it's that much different. But I think, everybody's in the same boat where there's no extra money. Saving is hard. It's hard to start. That's the most important part, is starting, but figuring out how to create discretionary income is the hard part.
And so that's some of the focus that we're going to talk about tonight. And then Brian, as we're going through a couple of things, is he's going to show you a process and a technology overlay that you can utilize for the coaching side of this on how do you really, going forward, be able to become a great saver. So we'll talk about how to get that done. So let's take a look at this a little bit deeper. So here's what I always say is you got to start somewhere. You got to start with an understanding of where are you today? It's like, you got to start somewhere. It's like taking an inventory. So when we talk about that, we're going to talk about how do you do it, which is number one, we've got to identify every form of cash flow, which is where's it coming from. You've got to have a spending plan. So I don't like to call it a budget. Nobody wants to be on a budget. Budget sounds kind of negative. Nobody likes the B word. And I always laugh, and Brian, you probably find the same thing when I'm sitting down with a couple and one of them will say, well, don't you think we need a budget? That's usually one of the couple wants the budget, the other one doesn't, but they're looking for us to get in the middle. I say, how to do that?
No marriage counseling here.
No marriage counseling. So we don't want to be doing that, but we want a spending plan. We want to plan for how to spend. I'm going to tell you that consumer debt is a big deal. And when I say it's a big deal is especially today, a few years back, and when I say a few years back, I could go back almost 24 months, and interest rates were significantly lower than they are today. And now we're seeing interest rates going back to the old days, for consumer debt, which is, car loans at 6-7%, mortgages at 7%. And by the way, consumer debt is for consumption. Good debt, by the way, and there is good debt, is for asset building. It's like a mortgage is actually good debt because I bought an asset with that. And hopefully an appreciating asset. So those who might have looked at a spouse when I said that and said, when I told you I should get that new car, depreciating assets is consumer debt, that's bad debt. So if it's buying a depreciating asset, not good. And then you need to have a strategy on how to save more, which Brian's going to specialize in. He's going to talk about the idea of utilizing a wealth building account and really talk about the psychology of saving and how that can happen. So let's talk about that a little bit. So if you're going through this, and by the way, for anyone who's online with us, whether you're listening to it live or you're hearing the replay of this, if you need any guidance with this or you need any tools to do this, we have forms that you can fill out and it'll help you to gather your thoughts. But you always start with, what's your salary, what's your bonus, what pay increases should you count on, where do you stand with regard to, Social Security, because there is a Social Security wage base, and what that means is at some point, if you have, high income, you max out your Social Security and then your income goes up, or maybe you max out your 401k and then your income goes up. But these are all of the cash flow sources that are actually going through with somebody. So Brian, anything else that you're seeing?
Yeah, I would just say that we weren't seeing this a couple of years ago, but we are now. Sometimes people ignore the interest that they're earning in the bank.
Well, 2 years ago, there was no interest.
Exactly. Now people are
point.
they're getting something. So it's like, all right, I have choice about what I do with the interest that's accumulating. What do? You want to identify everything that's additional funds coming in.
And for all of our listeners, whenever you're listening to this, one of the other things that we point out is that, a lot of people haven't really even looked at what they're getting on savings, what they're getting on money that's parked in the bank. But I would tell you that, right now on 30-day, 60-day CDs, and again, this can change at any time, they fluctuate, but you're seeing 4% out there, you're seeing 4.5%, versus, if you don't ask, you don't get, and they're sitting there paying you 1/10% or 1/4%, or maybe they're real generous and you get 0.5 point.
I see a lot of people sitting on a bunch of cash in the bank earning nothing. They've got home equity line accounts that are charging them 10%. It's like, how do we utilize the cash better?
It's a great insight. So these are all different ways of identifying cash flow and sources. The other one that I say is that nowadays you can do better, as we were just saying, dividends. People that have portfolios, and the portfolios sometimes are 60-40. Well, the 40 stands for bonds, and bonds pay dividends, and those dividend rates are real today, and they're very much like the bank rates. So, when bonds last year, when interest rates went up and the bond values went down, an example of which would be what occurred last year is when the federal government raised interest rates to slow down inflation, the value of bonds, even a 5-year treasury or 10-year treasury, was down almost 18% last year. So when that treasury had a lesser value, the interest being paid on it actually made the return on the treasury worth that much more. So a 3% treasury all of a sudden is a 5% treasury. And the reason being is because the price of and the value of the treasury went down, but new investments that people are making, dividends are real today, and as well as interest, as we just mentioned. And then you also have, realized capital appreciation of things going on, passive income, rental, things of that nature.
I'll say a quick one on the passive income. We do live in somewhat of a gig economy where a lot of people are just piecing things together with different things. And I know a lot of people, if they work in a restaurant, make cash. The cash stays in the house. Like, how do we make sure that that's getting accounted for, not just a regular paycheck?
And there are, points where you have people that are doing some gifting here and there. So sometimes you've got wealthy parents and grandparents and gifting, and some of that gifting happens on a regular basis. So it should be all accounted for and identified. So having said that, then we go to, identifying what are your expenses. And sometimes it's good just to sit down and go through this, because you want to really figure out is where are you?
This is an interesting one. We call it what's it cost to be you. We're not here to make everybody have a lesser lifestyle, like you said earlier, but sometimes just the exercise of going through these things realizes like, wow, there probably should be a lot of free cash flow. Where's it all going?
Well, it's interesting, Brian, when you say that, it reminds me of, when I get in my head, geez, I want to lose some weight. But, at the end of the day is, I don't want to move anymore and I don't want to eat any less.
Yep.
It's hard to do it. However, if somebody would say to me, Frank, I just want you to write down everything that you eat. Just keep a track. And all of a sudden, guess what I do? I make a better decision. Because it was like, I was gonna have those chips, and then I was like, I don't wanna write it down. Where I was gonna, grab a handful of whatever, and it's like, yeah, I don't wanna write that down.
Yep.
And just that consciousness, like keeping track of where you're spending, identifying where you're spending, that consciousness goes, maybe I should be doing that.
Yep.
And so you make a better decision, and, you start improving from there. But expenses are fixed and variable. And when we talk about fixed and variable, there's opportunities in both. And we're gonna look for where do we see some of those opportunities, like as an example on mortgages. Up until recent, we'd be doing a lot of refinancing, not that we're doing it, but we're recommending clients get the lowest rate they can get. Real estate taxes, when was the last time that you tried to appeal your taxes? They incrementally boost them up a little bit each year, but every once in a while, if you don't ask, you don't get.
Yep.
And so I always say is you should be looking at that. Car payments, being very conscious of those. Upkeep on cars, making sure that you're getting that taken care of. Insurance costs, is interesting. This was one of those years I had not shopped my property and casualty insurance in a while. I did it this year, and it was like a 30% difference in rate. And so it wasn't a few $100s, it was a few $1,000s that I ended up saving. So I would tell you every once in a while, and again, on property and casualty insurance, that's your auto, your homeowners, it pays to look at that. When it comes to insurance costs, health insurance as well, making sure that you're choosing the right benefits at work. So we're doing this presentation with you now, it's July. In October, when you're selecting your benefits for your company, or November, make sure you're meeting with an advisor like Brian and so forth, so that you can say, hey, which plan is best for me? What should I be doing with my benefits? Outside of that, life insurance is a little different. And when I say it's a little different, so sometimes people will go, it's like, wow, I'm paying a lot on my insurance. And I always say it's kind of like going to the mall. So if I buy a TV and the TV costs me $1,000, okay, that's one thing. But if the other TV costs me $1,100, but I get a $400 rebate in the form of cash value or dividends, that offsets the cost of that, so it makes it worth less.
Yep.
Not that it's worth less, but the cost is less. So you got to understand there's a difference of price and cost when it comes to insurance. Make sure that you know the difference, or have your advisor work with you. Student loan debt, consumer debt, we want to eliminate that. We'll talk about that. And then the variable expenses, I'm not telling you to don't get your hair cut. I don't, so obviously.
Small bill.
Brian's getting on the boat with me there. But we just tell you to be conscious of it. So, any other input up for you, Brian, that you see here, that you see with clients that you help them with?
I think talking to people about their spending is difficult. I don't want there to be the perception of we need you to spend less money.
No.
It should be, look, let's maintain the lifestyle, but let's figure out how to be more efficient with it. But I think sometimes you just have to take your own mental accounting of what's really like the difference between variable and discretionary. Like my utilities might be variable. I don't have a choice. They're going to be there. Discretionary stuff is we're doing what we want. The credit card bill's this or that every month. Just, I think, consciousness, as you said earlier, is a key.
I also find that impulsive spending, sometimes it's, if you can just kind of limit that a little bit. When I wrote, I've written some books. In one of the first books that I wrote, I talked about having a time frame before making large purchases. So if I'm going to spend more than $250 or $500 on one item or more, that I give myself maybe a 24-hour think about.
Yep.
this way I don't get impulsive and all of a sudden it's like, I don't even know why I bought that for $500. So it's like, you're walking through the mall, your golf clubs were perfectly fine. You see the sporting goods store and you go in there and you go, wow, look at this new driver. Next thing you know, you just spent $400 for a driver. And it's like, you know what, I should have probably spent $100 for a lesson rather than $400 for the driver.
Sure.
Because it's not gonna change my game. But little things like that, I think, are where you get value. So just a little time to think about, so.
Yeah, I think on that, the only other thing I would say is that from what I see, I don't think people mess up on big purchases. It's all just the little piddly day-to-day type stuff that just, we can't even account for it. That's where all the money goes, I think.
So once you've kind of done your end of that, then my suggestion is always work with a good advisor, a good cash flow strategist. And what you want that cash flow strategist to be helping you with is to find money that you're losing sometimes that you don't even know you're losing. We look into what we call opportunity costs. And when we talk about opportunity costs, it's interest charges, it's fees, it's taxes, it's inefficiencies, it's overpaying on different things. And by working with an advisor, when you're in the phase of what we call accumulation of life, which is where we're addressing today, that pressure will always be on you and your ability to save. But the more that you can lighten that up, the faster your accumulation rate will increase.
I think a lot of people think the key is I gotta make a little bit more so I can put more money in the bucket. And that's great, but if you don't plug some of the leaks, you're just pouring more money in and it's still coming out at the same rate. And that's the efficiency conversation.
100%, and the other side of that is, even when somebody stops working, which is what this is showing here, it doesn't go away. You still have taxes, you still have fees, you still have interest charges, you still have all of these. And so I always say is, a good advisor is speaking to this. They're looking at this, and it's kind of like seeing things that you don't see. Another way I give this example all the time. So many of us have played Scrabble, and so we can sit there and all of a sudden you've got these, the tiles, and you're looking and you're seeing the words a certain way, and then an advisor who does this a lot comes in and they see it different. All of a sudden you went from 15 points to 25 points on the same tiles. Yep. And so really cash flow strategies around this is having someone just give you that extra set of eyes on this.
I think that's key. It's, in a world of limited cash flow and infinite things we want to do, we have to try to be as efficient with the money and figure out how do we make $1 work like $2.
Perfect. Great insight. So, here's, what we were just talking about. And again, we want to minimize taxes. We want to minimize interest charges. I always say is I don't want to make the financial institutions rich. I want them to make me rich. Give me a good return on my money. Don't charge me a lot of interest. Minimize fees. These are all areas that one is when you recapture them, the whole idea is to recapture them for a long period of time. And the other one that we have written up here, and sometimes we forget to talk about this, there's a lot of financial myths that are out there. And one of the big financial myths is people when they were like, hey, I'm sending in extra payments on my mortgage, or I'm doing that because I want to be paid off faster. And I ask them, I go, it's like, so what's your cost of funds? And they look at me when they go, what do you mean, what's my cost of funds? And I'll say, so what's your mortgage rate? And they go, oh, well, I refinanced at 3%. I said, well, you're paying 3%, but it's tax deductible. And then I look and I go, well, you're 3% when you deduct it, and your tax rate between state and federal is 30%. So your real rate is 2.1. And I go, nowadays you can earn 4 and 5% in the bank. And I said, so you can make substantially more than what you're paying. And then they look at me and I go, yes, maybe today is not the time that you should be prepaying it. Yep. There's better strategies and better things to do with your money.
And I think that's, maybe the myth part of that is because at times it is the right move.
Right, but not always.
Not always. Things cycle and you kind of have to pay attention to what's going on in the economic landscape.
And I always say money also in investing is oftentimes emotional. And what happens is anytime our emotions get involved, whether it's eating or investing, it's usually wrong. So if you think about it. So it's one of those of, when the market is going up, I'm like, oh my gosh, things are great, and I want to put in more. And when the market's going down, so, oh my gosh, let me take my money out. And so what we're doing is we're buying high and selling low, directly the opposite of what we should be doing, which is we just need to have a plan on how we invest.
We talk about that process of buy high, sell low, we'll end and repeat until broke.
Exactly.
Can't do that. Emotions will do that too. That's what it is.
Great insight. So one of the things that I have people ask me all the time, it's like, but Frank, I already got this debt. How do we get out? And so, we'll walk you through this. Brian, maybe you want to take the first one?
I mean, I think, getting rid of debt, obviously, there's two things. You're either restructuring to better terms, or you're figuring out how to add more money to the debt pay down pile.
Well, you just said a minute ago, which was a great insight, if I've got money sitting in the bank, at 2 and 3%, and I've got credit card debt out here at 20.
We saw a lot of people refinance debt using home equity through lines of credit, and rates were great, 3, 4, 5%. And they were sitting on money in the bank, wasn't paying them much. Now those rates have gone up. People are paying 10% on home equity lines of credit now. They haven't realized that the bank, it's like, we need to pay that off. We're sitting money earning 0 to 5% in the bank, but they're charging us 10 in the same institution. There's a shift there. If it's lines of credit, paying that stuff down doesn't reduce your liquidity. You still have the credit available. If it's installment loans, you need to be a little bit careful to make sure that you maintain the proper liquidity when paying those down.
It's a great insight. And even we're seeing people that, are still purchasing homes or purchasing vehicles. And what I just tell you is you need to really be very conscious of your cost of funds. I love the idea of interfamily financing. This is, where you've got, a parent who's got means, and, maybe they've got money that's sitting in the bank at 3, 4, 5%, and the kids are paying 10s.
Yep.
So maybe somewhere in between, the parent does better and the kids do better.
It's an interesting one, because a lot of people, we know that pride is one of the biggest issues in America with people. It's like, I don't want to ask for help. But sometimes asking people, that's a good transaction on both ends. That's not necessarily helping one way. Yeah.
It's interesting because it's a cultural thing. We come across certain cultures where the family stays involved, they help one another, and you see that culture do better and better and better financially. And then there's the cultures when they don't talk about money, they don't, and all of a sudden it's like every generation restarts going up a ladder. Somebody went up, and then the next generation has to start over that whole ladder again, and there's no thought.
Yeah. So these other couple of things, the waterfall example, I think a lot of that is with regard to high interest debt and credit cards. Which ones do I pay off first? Depends on the rates, depends on the payments. Sometimes paying off a lower interest card but freeing up a lot of cash flow, that's key. Now you got a lot more cash flow to put towards the other one. You can do it the other way. High interest rates, get rid of those first, knock them down.
So one of the things that I always have found is, when we come across people that they've got, credit card debt, it's usually not one card.
No.
There's usually, okay, here's a list of the cards, and you start looking and go, well, how do you pay them? I go, I send this one 100, and this one 100, and this one, and you have that going on. And so, the whole idea with the waterfall is, all right, so on all of the cards, we're gonna just put in the minimum. So even though the minimum is 25 and you're sending 100, we're gonna send in the minimums on all of them, except the highest rate card. And on that one, we're gonna take that full payment. So if I had 5 cards, sending me $100 each or $500, and the minimum payments were 25 or 125, what I'm effectively gonna do, instead of 100 on each one of these, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take 4 of the cards and send them 25 each. And I'm gonna take $375 and apply towards the one till it's paid down. And then once that one's paid down, then we're gonna go to the next one. I'm gonna take the $375 that was going towards the one, add the $25 to it of the next card, and I'm sending them 400. Then the next card we go to is 425, I'm sending them. Then the next one, 450, I'm sending them. And then on the last card, I'm sending them the 500. That's the way that you pay down debt. That 100 and 100 and 100 just keeps you in debt for a long time.
Yep.
So you really have to have a strategy, and again, work with an advisor to do it. But if you can't get away from the cards, we got to figure out a way to get that done.
Yeah, there should be, for most people, the ability to live without those cards. A lot of cash flow ends up going towards the debt, which just takes it away from everything else. I think there's 2 strategies here. One is, how do I get rid of the debt? And the second one is key, as you were saying before, is like, how do I recapture that cash flow? How do I make sure there's a process in place so that money that I was sending towards the credit cards is not just getting absorbed into lifestyle because it's sitting in the bank?
And it's interesting that you happen to mention that, because I think you're going to be showing that in just a couple minutes.
Hopefully we're still alive.
We're going to be good. So what we're going to talk about now is developing a plan around saving. And so when we're talking about saving, we've addressed the fact that, hey, you've got to start early. We talked about, we've got to minimize that emotional spending. The other thing is we've got to save then spend, not spend then save, and Brian will speak to that a little bit. And then we're going to talk about the concept of utilizing a wealth building account, which is a specific strategy around this. So this year, by the way, maybe Brian, you can speak to this. You didn't know this one was popping up there for a second, did you?
I didn't.
So This actually shows the example that you have teed up in the other, that we can pull up if you want to go there first.
Yeah, so I think the idea here is, you've got somebody with a salary of $100,000, call them 35 years old, that they're gonna work until they're 65, because everybody magically retires, get their last check right when they turn 65, right? Not always. So the last check is key. It might be at 65, it might be at 45, you never know.
Well, as a little FYI, they did move the Social Security retirement age back to 67 for normal retirement age for most of our listeners.
And that's all life expectancy related, and I don't think we should expect things to change. I think they'll continue to
If
keep their eyes
anything,
on
it could keep
things.
getting pushed back a little bit
Yep.
because, we're living longer and that puts additional pressure on the financial system.
So most people, they're doing their 401k either because they think they're supposed to or they know they're supposed to, but that's usually the first step that everybody makes is, hey, I've got to save for 401k. And I think, for a lot of people, where do you get your advice? Either your boss, your parents, you hear that, it's like, we got to save for retirement. That becomes the first thing, but sometimes it's the only thing people do. And so if they're saving 5%, which is I think a typical 401k contribution, and fortunate to get a match even, you might end up with $500,000 or so after doing this. The key though is if you're starting with a salary of 100,000 and that's going to continue to go up from time to time, should you be saving more? Do you have the ability to save more? And theoretically, we should be able to save our raise as we get a raise. We were living without it the day before, then you get a raise. How do you incorporate that into your savings strategy?
So and it's interesting, Brian, I know that we've seen this number and we've seen these numbers many times. If you think about it, the reason why most people do the 5% to work is because most pension plans over the years, companies have gotten away from. So I remember when I first started in the business in the 80s, and I've come across people, they had pension plans where they stop working and they get a check every month. And what happened was a lot of those plans went away, and the reason why they went away was because companies couldn't afford to fund them, because we went from, when people would retire at 65 and they were expected only to be here till 78. Okay, so it was like, hey, you were only supposed to get that pension for 13 years, but now people are living until their 80s, until their 90s, and they're living a long time, and you hear a lot of people that are getting close to 100. Hey, so-and-so's, your grandmother's 95 or 98. They're getting paid for a long time, so these companies got away from that, and they came out with the idea of, hey, let people fund their own retirement, which is called a 401k. And then we'll give them an incentive to do it, so they came out with what's called a safe harbor 401k, which is if you put in 5%, they'll give you some matching money. And so most people will do the 5 because they know they get extra money for that. So that 5%, when you look at it over that, 30 years of someone doing it and they make 5% on their money, that's that 500,000 that you save.
And when you're doing a percentage to your 401k and getting a raise, the amount you're contributing is increasing. Now you might hit the limits year to year,
right?
But percentage base is going to allow that contribution to increase, which is key. And I think for most, or I should say most, but for a lot of people that we see, 401k balance is the biggest number on the page, maybe outside of the real estate.
I would say for 95% of the population, outside of a residence, and I'll address that just very quickly because I see people all the time and I've written about this, I speak about this. A home is not really an asset for retirement. And the reason being is a asset for retirement is something that will bring you cash flow in retirement, not something that takes your cash flow in retirement. And a home takes your cash flow. It doesn't send you a check unless you've got boarders living with you.
Yep.
And usually the kids are not boarders, they don't usually pay. So, that 40-year-old that wants to stay home and live with you, I don't think they're paying rent 9 times out of 10. So that doesn't work. So here's what we're telling you is the home is really, it's an asset on your balance sheet, but it's a cash flow liability, and it ultimately becomes a deferred asset to your kids the day you're not here.
Yep.
So that's the way I would tell you to think of the house.
Yep.
Unless you're gonna downsize and take the money and put it elsewhere, but now you see the retirement homes cost more than the regular homes.
Where can you go if you sell your house right now? You sell your house, you sell your 3.3% mortgage, now you gotta go buy a house with a 7% mortgage too, which is why there's no inventory.
And for those of you who are younger and listening to this, the interesting thing is none of us are gonna know, so don't count on the house.
Yep.
Count on everything else you can control, which we're talking about now. So here's one of the things that you can control, and Brian, I'd like you to spend a little time talking about, the difference here, which is, the 4% pay increase and what you can do with the money and what happens if you were to put it away at the 3%, and maybe talk a little bit about this, because this is really a big deal.
So the screen previous, what we're looking at here where the mouse is, that salary increase, and then to the right of it, yearly increase, that on the previous screen was at 4%. And so a lot of people will just, do their match, but they're not doing anything else. And we know that, look, you should theoretically be able to save some of your raise. Doesn't have to be all of it, but even if you just broke it down in your head and said, hey, I gotta raise, a third of it's gonna go towards taxes, a third of it'll go towards spending, I'll save a third of it, something like that. But here we just switched the increase to how much the spending is from, instead of 4% increase, we changed that as a 3% towards spending. If you can just start contributing a little bit more, and contributing is the wrong word, we're gonna talk about a process for this, but how do I capture my raise? It in essence doubles the amount of money you've saved down in the yellow there. And that's really just a mechanism for, how do I just not have all of my raise disappear year to year? How do I save a third of it? How do I save a quarter of it? And if you can just be intentional about having a process in order to do that, it gives you, I think one of the keys you said earlier, it gives you a lot more choice later. It gives you a lot more, I think, confidence when you know you're saving money. But there's got to be intention behind it. And I think the first slide you had was a why. And if you don't have a why or a vision for later in life, what it might look like, you might not be that amped up about saving because it takes away from your current lifestyle. So there's got to be a reason why you're saving down the line. That's motivating. You referenced eating and losing weight earlier. If you don't have a motivation to do that,
Why do it?
if you're not writing down those things, you're going to keep eating the chips.
So I was at a conference, a year or so ago, and they brought in a behavioral psychologist that talks about behavioral finance. And one of the most insightful things that they spoke to is people that retire well are the ones that when they were younger, they envisioned that at some point they wanted to take care of their future self. And they can envision themselves someday being retired, someday then wanting to maybe work because they want to, not because they have to, or being able to walk away from work and maintaining a certain lifestyle. And because of that, they had the why and the reason to do it. But people that, I call it the YOLO, Brian, you're the one that taught me what that means. Go ahead and let everybody know.
You only live once.
So people that go the YOLO route, which they don't think about their future self, they're not thinking about what their life may look like the day they stop working, tends to ignore this. And when they ignore this, they usually find out too late. Because I was doing a conference earlier this morning, I think, Brian, you're online, and I was talking about, I said, if you really think of what are your financial assets? And we said your greatest financial asset, everybody was like, is your income and your cash flow. And I said, that's true, but it's time. So it's both, it's income and time. And so if I've got my income, but I blew it on the time, and all of a sudden I realized when I was 55 or 60 that I wanted to catch up, I'm way too late in the game, because I'm gonna have to work a lot of years in order to get to a point where I can stop. Versus if I just use time, which is how we started this conversation, to our benefit, I ended up so much better off.
The people that wait, we saw it earlier, a lot of times people think, all right, if I wait, that's fine, I'll just start here. And if you think about how money grows, a compound growth curve, if you slow down and don't start early, you're not cutting off the beginning part of it. You still have to go through the slow years of getting that up. You're cutting off the back end where that takeoff phase of money is. Starting early is key. This part, I think, is probably the most key, is having, you called it a spending plan earlier. It's not a budget. People should be able to go out and live the way they want. When they've set themselves up to have a process to automatically accumulate cash, all of a sudden when they need cash, it's not going on a credit card at 20%. It's coming from the bank. And so you said knowing your cost of funds, if you take the money out of the bank, what's your cost? I'm losing whatever interest it was earning. But if people don't have a good process for saving money, that's where that consumer debt comes in. And getting around that mountain is hard, and it takes a long time, and it slows down your ability to start saving. So I think the psychology part here for me is that I think many people, we don't realize how much our income changes over the course of time. Many people don't realize how much their income fluctuates even in an intra-year basis. And it could be regular raises that you get cost of living, but some people get a bonus, some people make commissions, some people exceed the Social Security wage base and get a bump in their net pay because that tax doesn't come out anymore. Same thing with a 401k. Some people, it's just the hours that they work. They work more or less hours, they work overtime, they get a shift differential if they work at night. All these different things will cause cash flows to fluctuate. And I think when most people have all of their money sitting in a checking account, the lifestyle fluctuates because the cash flow fluctuates. People who have a straight salary, the lifestyle doesn't fluctuate too much because we're living up to whatever's coming in from the money. So, the process is really about having a setup that does not have all of your money going to your spending account out of the gate. I think the key for many people is just not doing that in the first place. You referenced earlier having a little pause on big decisions. I have a friend that used to have money in a savings account. It was ING back in the day.
I remember them.
He was very
They were the one
impulsive.
with the commercial, what's your number?
Yeah, carry around the big orange number.
Yep.
So he was very impulsive. He would buy toys all the time, cool toys. They were great. They were a lot of fun. But he realized that he was doing that a lot. And so he started keeping his money there. He would initiate a transfer. It would take 3 business days to do it. That impulse would wane. He would cancel the transfer. So like you said earlier, sometimes giving yourself some pause to think about what you're doing, that in itself is key. Intention, right? So this part here, I think it starts with, it is creating a delta between what your income increases are and what your outflows are going to be.
So maybe, Brian, let me just see here. I'm gonna shift gears for you here that maybe you can graph it or
Okay.
draw it for somebody. So seeing how I'm the computer expert in the room, I'm really not, by the way. I'm just kidding for everybody listening. So bear with us 1 minute. We're just gonna shift to something. So let me just see here. How do I get to my whiteboard? Okay. All right, Brian, maybe you can walk them through kind of what we're talking about, which is just very simply stated, how people manage their cash flow today from when they earn it to their taxes and so forth, versus that one little incremental change that's easy to make that would help those numbers come to life.
Personally, I'm on probably my 3rd iteration of how I process cash flow, and it's gotten better each time. So for many people, and I joke, there will be a class action lawsuit against HR one day. They tell people when you get a job, give me your bank account information, we'll get you set up for direct deposit. So people make money, sometimes it's a couple, 2 paychecks, and where do the direct deposits go?
To their checking account.
They go to the checking account. That is probably the most common thing we see, without a doubt. And I think that calling it a checking account is nice and all, but if you're honest with yourself, that's a spending account. Nobody really puts money in the checking account to save it. And if you do, you probably run into the realization at some point that I'm not really saving it. My checking account balance kind of hovers in the same neighborhood, even though my salary is going from 50 to 60 to 70, 80 to 90 to 100,000. The checking account balance stays similar.
Yeah, it's the bill paying account, it's the account I'm living at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the first key is, if you just say it out loud, I deposit 100% of my income to my spending account. You think about that, and it's like, that's probably not the move. I should probably change that. But so for a lot of people, the direct deposit goes there. I always say what comes out of here: the food, the fun, the mortgage, the car, all these things. And then we're left in a spot where, all right, is there extra money after the month is done and we've paid all the bills?
And it's an interesting insight, because from, you can have a family that has modest income to families that have a lot of income. And I always laughed when, I would meet with someone who's got a lot of income, and at the end of the year, you'd catch them in April and they're filing their taxes or filing extension. And I always hear this, I know it says I made this, but I don't understand where it went.
Yep.
And so what happens is as their income went up over the years, guess what happened?
There's 2 things. There's income, and then there's expenses, and they kind of fall right in suit with each other. And that's because all the money goes to the spending account. So I think for a lot of people, we live, from a financial perspective, relatively inactive lives. We talk about our money when we're talking to people about our money, which is infrequently for most people. You referenced earlier,
Most
people don't talk
try to
about money.
avoid the conversation.
Absolutely.
Just one of those, want to talk about money or politics
Yep.
nowadays?
Yep. So, the money thing though, there's benefits to talking about that. But if we sit there and live inactive lives and all of the money goes into the spending account, I think for many of us, we live our lifestyle based up to what's ever in the bank account. It's like, well, how do we adjust that? So for a lot of people, it starts with just how do I save in the first place? Then it's really, how do I live a good life but mitigate some of the wasteful spending that I don't really need to do? Frank, how do I go, just move your page here?
Look at me as this expert.
This is great. So that was great, but I think what would end up happening at some level is what we would call like a treadmill effect. So I'd get paid, I would put it in my spending account, we'll put a C there for checking, and then if there's money left at the end of the month, maybe I'll move some over to savings. And it's a great thought, but it requires 2 things. It requires you to be proactive about it, and then it requires you to stay on top of it and adjust the numbers as your income adjusts, or as your bills and expenses adjust. Inevitably, people pull the money out of savings, they gotta fix the tires, they gotta buy a new washer and dryer, whatever it is, and it's this treadmill where like, it's such a common thing we hear, it's like, I make good money, where does it all go? We make good money, I feel like we should be saving more, right? But why doesn't it come, why doesn't it happen? There's no process for it. So the second thing that I did to tweak this was like, all right, there's gotta be a better way to get off this hamster wheel. Well, let me automate this a little bit. You know, if we are gonna be out living life and not paying attention to finance, there needs to be something working the finances in the background, and now automation is pretty simple. So this line here became an automated transfer of money going from checking to savings. And it was, all of a sudden, I'm saving money, I'm not thinking about it, it's happening in the background, and maybe it's $100 a month or $1,000 a month, whatever it is. It's great, except there's a key thing missing there, and it's the fact that if you recognize that your income is going to be variable, this down here is a fixed outflow that we're sending to savings. And so it's great when it starts, but if your income keeps varying, for most people it's an upward trajectory, and you have a fixed amount that you're saving a smaller percentage of income as time goes on. Realistically, with raises, we should be able to save more of our income. So it's like, well, how do we tweak that a little bit? This fixed and variable is key here. You said a word earlier, conscious. I think the current setup here that we're looking at, direct deposit to checking, it leaves us in a position to spend money unconsciously because we don't have to do anything to get the money. It's already in the spending account. So life goes on, we do what we do. We say yes a lot in the summer, especially around here, ice cream, whatever we're doing, right? The fixed part of the income here, any saving that we do is a conscious decision. And so what are we more likely to do? You know, sit around and talk about money and be conscious about it? No, we're gonna be living life in the summer, right? So the key here is, how do I get this thing flipped around? So the next iteration, which is the current one, which is great, is like, stop putting all of the money in your spending account. Open up, you referenced it as a wealth building account earlier. A wealth building account, a wealth coordination account, whatever you want to call them, but have it be a separate account than what your spending account is. I always look at it, it's baseball season for me, and I guess with kids that play baseball, it's always baseball season. But when the ball comes in and all the income comes into that first account, I want to be conscious about where I'm throwing it around the field. I don't want to just have it be in the spending account and have to get it out of there, otherwise it all gets spent. So it's a flip around. Send it to a new account that's not your checking. That means that all of the variations in pay are going to this new account here.
So that's the bonuses, pay increases, when you hit your social security limit, when you max out your 401k, when you do overtime.
All of those
And,
things.
you know, you're getting a little car extra payment here or there, everything is hitting the account.
All income. I have my tax refunds, if there's a refund, to get direct deposited to the account there.
Great insight.
Any sources of inflows that you'll get, have a central source. One, it's good for strategic purposes, but two, it really makes the data a lot better and you can get a good idea of what your cash flow looks like. So here, now it's like, all right, well, how do we get the money out and pay our bills? So now we want to have, just like a regular payroll, something sending money out to our checking account where all the bills get paid from. But the key here is maybe to have a fixed amount that goes out. So two keys, I guess. One is having a lesser amount go to your spending account than you're earning. So if you're earning $5,000 a month and you're spending $5,000 a month, you can't save. And I think everybody we ask, if we said, hey, could you save 20 bucks a month? Everybody says yes. Nobody will say no to that. So even if it's just 20 bucks, but whatever it is, in this example, say it's $4,000 a month that you're spending. There's a delta there of $1,000. When you set it up like this, and now the direct deposits are going to an account that's not your checking, when all of a sudden you're not making 5 and now you're making 6, you haven't changed this fixed outflow of $4,000 that's going to checking. And so that delta now goes from $1,000 to $2,000. And without thinking or doing anything, you're now saving $2,000 a month instead of $1,000 a month. When you also have a fixed amount going to your checking account, I believe this, I think I've learned this over the course of the last 15 years, working with people at all different income levels, all different savvy of investment. We'll live on whatever somebody gives us. Like, we'll make it work. You know, I know people that make little bits of money and people that make lots of money. They all seem to be enjoying life. Like, we'll always figure out how to make it work. Everybody pays the mortgage, right? But so if you have a fixed outflow going to your checking and spending account now, that does create a delta that as you make more, you'll now make conscious decisions about how to change your spending here. So two things. Number one, as money's accumulating inside of this WBA account, if all of a sudden you have a big month, if you're going on vacation, you gotta pay for it, it's on the credit card, then you get the bill and it's like, oh man, I got this big credit card bill. That accumulation has happened in that WBA account, the money will be there. It's right there, it's just another one of your bank accounts, it's accessible, there's no penalties, there's no fees, go get the money, pay off your credit card. The second piece is, you have some choice about how much money you're sending to your spending account. And when you make that a fixed amount, I think the consciousness of that is key because it will work both ways. Sometimes you might buy a car and say, hey, the car's 500 bucks a month. I gotta send myself 4,500. The key earlier, when you were talking about paying off debt, the word was recapture. I think where a lot of people fall short, they reduce the debt payments, but they don't have a mechanism to make sure that they recapture them. So that payment that they were sending to credit cards now just gets absorbed into their lifestyle. And we all, at some level, have some lifestyle addiction, we're not giving it back. Once you get the good iPhone, you're not going back to the iPhone that I have, right? So.
I got the iPhone 1 if you were.
Yeah, right? Flip phone. So having the ability to recognize, hey, I just paid off my car. That was $500 a month. Let me reduce what I'm sending to my spending account by $500. That doesn't need to go out to the car payment anymore. And now I've recaptured it. And when you can be conscious about these fixed outflows, every penny that you earn on top of those will accumulate first in an account sitting there waiting for you to do something with it. And so one of the things you said earlier that I think is great is we want to position ourselves to make more decisions about money. The more time we make decisions, the more times we make good decisions. And that doesn't mean that spending money is a bad decision and saving is a good decision. Spending is fine if it's done intentionally. Like, have an impulse, think about it, make the choice to say yes, great. It was thought out. There's nothing wrong with buying things and spending money. But this flips everything around. So now if you want to not pay attention and be inactive with your money, this variable amount of money is all getting saved. You don't really have to think about doing anything with your raises or when you get a bonus. The only thing you have to think about is, what do I do with the extra money as it accumulates? What do I do with the delta? A $2,000 a month delta here. What do I do with the cash flow? And I think when you work with somebody as a co-pilot, you have an advisor, a cash flow strategist that's doing this with you, you have people that are going to poke you along the way and say, hey, you've got some cash that accumulated. What should we do with it? And I think it puts people in a very easy position to just make one of three choices. I'm either spending it, I'm leaving it as cash, or I'm doing something else with it to grow it. There's nothing else to do with money.
And you're conscious of it. And, it's interesting is, I've been doing this for a while, many years. And in all of my years of doing this, I never hear these conversations. The conversations that I hear are, hey, you need insurance. Hey, what are you gonna do in investments? Hey, I got this hot new investment. And the reality is, this is really what makes the difference of someone's financial success or failure in life.
We haven't talked about a product here. We haven't talked about an investment.
This has nothing to do with a product. This has to do with what is your strategy, what is your process for mastering cash flow and how to play the cash flow game.
The perfect analogy that you said earlier is, do I spend $400 on a better driver, or do I get a golf lesson and fix my swing?
Right.
The swing is the answer. At some level, when you're really good, the club might make a difference, but I've seen you play and you've seen me play. It's not the clubs, I don't think.
Club. And the thing, for our guests and our listeners, I call them part of the C&A family, is I always say that good financial advice doesn't come down to a product, because if your financial success is based upon the success of a product, that's going to be a problem. Your financial success has to be based upon the success of a process. And this is all process, and this is really the differentiator of what type of advice people get, which is this is advice on how to truly build wealth, manage wealth, and so forth. All of the other things that go along with it are the things that everybody's selling, okay? But it starts with this. And so, for our listeners, I always say this is foundational. This is, whether it's you, it's your family members that you love and care about, they need to know about this, your kids. This is the message and the process that needs to be shared. And there is technology that we help people with in this. And maybe Brian, just share, what we mean by that, because, when someone gets a C&A card, it says coaching and advising. Advice you can get anywhere, but the coaching has to have a process that allows someone to be a great financial coach for you. So maybe share what this whole process looks like, Brian, as far as the coaching side and how we're able to do that.
Yeah, I think, for me, I have two sets of clients. I have people that I operate co-pilot doing this process with them, and I have clients that I don't. The people that do this tend to save a lot more money. We tend to talk a lot more frequently, which I think is, in any relationship, that's key, communication. When it's financial, the more I talk to you, the more I'm in tune with what you're doing, the more we can kind of design this to fit right. There's no one right way to do these things, it's design.
It's kind of like a GPS on the car, it's like correcting. And, if I put the GPS on and I'm traveling somewhere, and if I'm really not, if I don't have the GPS on, I could be heading anywhere, and anything seems fine when you don't know where you're going.
Yep.
However, if all of a sudden, it keeps coming in and trying to say correct course, and all of a sudden now you get some coaching, you're most likely to get where you want to be.
Yeah, so I remember the first GPS I had, it would say recalculating,
Yes.
right? And so now that recalculating is kind of the meetings that we have with people, and this is the coaching side of it, is they're calibration meetings. And the calibration, we're measuring how much free cash flow people have, how much discretionary income, and that money is like, what do I do with this? Do I spend it? Do I save it? Do I invest it? Do I give it away? And that, I think the more we talk about that stuff, And the more people see and recognize what their cash flow is, they get confident about that. And I think when you're educated about money, and you talk to people like us a lot about it, you will be educated about it. That's where it starts, organization, education. You'll be very confident in making your decisions. It'll be a lot easier to make them. And that really sets you up to do stuff going forward. This process is really, at some level, intended to mimic how 401k works for people. Like that automated, unconscious process of saving money is why it's the biggest number on the page. Why wouldn't that concept work everywhere else on your balance sheet?
It's a great insight. So for all of our guests this evening that are listening to us, that are watching this video, or if you're listening to this afterwards, we're going to be wrapping up at this point. And it's been our pleasure to be with you again. Brian Cunniff, one of our lead advisors, cash flow strategists here at C&A Financial Group. All of our advisors, by the way, here at C&A Financial Group are trained in this type of strategy and conversation and can provide the education, the process, and the platform to help you with this and to be a great financial coach, helping you go forward so that you can really be a great saver. And again, my name's Frank Congilose. It's my pleasure to be with you. We thank you for the opportunity to spend time with you. Brian?
Thanks, Frank.
Always a pleasure. Everybody, have a great evening and share this with others. Help others, make a difference.
Communicate about money.
Talk about it.
Yep.
Thank you and have a great evening.